Prime Minister Modi is on his way now to Bali in Indonesia. He's attending the 17th G20 group of 20 countries meeting. It's a very important summit, the Leaders Summit. During this visit, the Prime Minister will be holding bilateral meetings with various G20 leaders. Unclear, though, whether he'll be meeting the Chinese President Xi Jinping, who's met the US President Joe Biden just a little while back. Before his departure, the Prime Minister said during the Bali summit, I'll have extensive discussions with other G20 leaders on key issues of global concern such as reviving global growth, food and energy security, environment, health and digital transformation. So the big focus, as you can see, apart from the Prime Minister, and we'll talk more tomorrow and day after about that, but it's this, the shaking of hands of Joe Biden and Xi Jinping. Joe Biden in meeting Xi Jinping for the first time since he became president last year. There have been delegation level talks which have taken place. You can see the Chinese foreign minister as well over there, but it's still unclear at this stage what has transpired. Remember, this comes at a time when there have been a lot of tensions between America and between America and China over Taiwan. In fact, China held military exercises off the coast of Taiwan as well, when the US Speaker Nancy Pelosi defied Beijing and chose to go ahead and visit the island. So what actually came off that? Xi, of course, has consistently maintained that the US must respect the one China policy. Beijing doesn't see Taiwan as anything but its own. The US has a much more nuanced view. They maintain very strong relations with Taiwan, as indeed other countries in the world which do the same, including India. But this is a thorny issue as far as Beijing is concerned, and one that hopefully this meeting will try and simmer down tensions between the two nuclear superpowers. US President Joe Biden meeting China Xi Jinping at the G20 Summit in Bali. This is the first face-to-face meeting since Biden came to power in January 2021. A key meeting since tension began over Taiwan, when the US Speaker Nancy Pelosi ignored China and visited Taiwan, triggering massive Chinese military exercises around the island. India is a key participant at the G20 Summit this year, though it's not yet clear if Prime Minister Modi, who's flying to Bali now, will meet President Xi. India and China are more stable along the line of actual control, but tensions do remain. From the 1st of December, India takes over the presidency of the G20 grouping from Indonesia. The next summit will be held in India. This symbol featuring a lotus was revealed earlier and will be the banner under which the India summit will be held. Members of the G20 represent 85% of the globe's GDP, over 75% of global trade. What's more, the group accounts for 75% of the world's population. The talks this time come in the wake of uneven post-pandemic recovery, debt vulnerabilities, and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Specifically, the Prime Minister will participate in sessions on food and energy security, digital transformation, and health. Russia's President Vladimir Putin will be absent at a time when his country has suffered serious reverses in Ukraine, while Ukraine's president will make an appearance through a video link. Prime Minister Modi returns from Indonesia on Wednesday. The G20 summit in Delhi next year will be grounded in the theme Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, One Future. With Maha Siddiqui, Vishnu Shom for NDTV. Well, joining us now, Meera Shankar, the former ambassador of India to the United States. We're also joined by Ashok Sanjana, another very senior diplomat, as also Uday Bhaskar, the defense analyst. I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us. Great panel. Ms. Shankar, let me come to you first. The G20 accounts for approximately 85% of the world's population, 75% of the GDP of the world. Why is it important for India going forward?
Well, I think it's an important grouping which brings together both developed and developing countries on a common platform to discuss and seek a way forward on the major challenges which the world is facing. Of course, it was most effective when it was launched in the wake of the 2008 economic crisis, when countries rapidly agreed to provide stimulus, to boost their economies and, to make banking regulations and the regulatory framework much more stringent so that this kind of, crash which could take down the global system with it became less possible, or it reduced the possibility of such a systemic crash occurring. On environmental and other issues, there were discussions and agreement to engage. In recent years, it has kind of muddled along, but still I would say that it is the one grouping which brings together all the key economies of the world to try to find common platforms. Sure. Otherwise, we approach issues from divergent ends of the spectrum based on our perspective, whether we are developed or developing countries, whether we are, part of the Western Alliance or we are not part of the Western Alliance. And so this is a very important grouping.
I want to just quickly go across to my colleague Maha Siddiqui, who joins us now from Bali. Maha, we'll come back to the India story in a moment, but any word on the outcome of that all-important meeting between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden?
Yes, some information is now coming through the White House. So we understand that the American side has raised the issue of Taiwan as was expected. And what we are learning is that President Biden has in fact condemned the coercive actions China is taking against Taiwan. Apart from that, the other important and very critical aspect really over here, Vishnu, is that any resorting to nuclear option in the Ukraine war has been discussed by the two sides. And remember, the Chinese side, and this is the thinking of the West, that if the West can bear upon China to pressurize Russia, to draw a red line over this issue, specifically the nuclear option issue, then it would come as some sort of success in this meeting. So I understand that issue has also been clearly discussed over here. Xi and Biden, as per the White House, have agreed that nuclear war should never be fought and condemned Russian atomic threats to Ukraine. So two important points coming through. And this is information that is coming via the White House.
Oh, this is really important news. Ambassador Sajana, this is information coming in just now. Would you like to comment on this? Do you believe that at a time when there have been so many differences between America and China, we've got the two nuclear superpowers coming together, issuing a statement just now. In fact, it's likely to be a statement, but this is the White House release, where they have said that, the nuclear threat in Ukraine has to be averted at all costs. Do you believe America and China can come together to try and bring peace to the Ukraine?
Well, I think it will be too much to expect that both of them will come together to bring peace, as you mentioned, Vishnu. But, short of that, I would say that it is good that the two leaders have met. This is, the first meeting over the last close to 2 years since Mr. Biden came to power. So I think it's good. And notwithstanding the fact that there are so many differences between the two countries, whether it is Taiwan, whether it is economy, whether it is Hong Kong, whether it is South China Sea, its expansionist policies, or, the economic contestation between the two sides, the ban on export of chips, and so on and so forth. Notwithstanding all those aspects, the two sides have come together to meet. Now, so that in itself is a good signal. But on the bilateral issues, we see that there is nothing much that has been achieved, as was to be expected. In the case of Taiwan also, we got the readout from the White House. But I'm sure on the issue of Taiwan, when we hear what the Chinese authorities have to say, it is going to be different in the sense that it will report what she has told Biden, that this is an internal issue, etc., etc. On the nuclear issue, there are aspects where both the countries have similar interests, and this is one of those. So I think both the countries putting their weight together and dealing with this particular issue, it's a major global security issue. or for that matter, some of the other aspects like climate change. Again, both America and China are the biggest polluters. So how do they come together to deal with that issue? So some things which are not bilateral,
sure.
I think one can expect that we can make, push the envelope forward. But on the bilateral issues, I think it is still not, I don't think we can expect a very significant
In fact, I wanted
progress.
to ask Commodore Bhaskar about that. There's no confirmation on whether a meeting between the Prime Minister and Xi Jinping is going to take place. They've not ruled it out by any means, and I think hopefully there may be a surprise, because that would certainly be a step forward. How important would that be, sir?
Well, I would say, Vishnu, that a personal meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping would be desirable, mainly because of the context, which is the India-China relationship is now in a sullen state, primarily because of what happened in Galwan. And the last 2 years plus, while there have been a number of talks at the military commanders level, the political and diplomatic relationship is laden with a considerable amount of tension. So one hopes that this will happen, but I would say the probability is low, because on the Chinese side, for President Xi, the meeting with Mr. Joe Biden, the US president, is on top of his agenda. And therefore, as I said, if I am proved wrong tomorrow, I think that would be a good thing for the bilateral India-China. But my sense is that at the moment, the probability is low. But I'd like to add one more strand, if I may, Vishnu, which is for India. I think the Bali summit is multi-layered in terms of both the symbolism and the potential substantive outcome. The symbolism first, it was 67 years ago that we had the Bandung summit, 1955.
Yeah.
And at that time, Prime Minister Nehru played a very important role. And in a way, I would say, established and burnished India's credibility to bring its voice to global matters at a critical time. I think Prime Minister Modi has a similar kind of opportunity. And I think it's a sheer coincidence that today is November 14th and that we are remembering Prime Minister Nehru for the birth anniversary. But this is the symbolic connection that I see between Bandung and Bali. And the substantive part is that India is going to take over the presidency starting December 1. Mm-hmm. And if India can again burnish its credibility, both in terms of speaking for those whose voice needs to be heard on the global arena, and secondly, I think on the nuclear issue, let's not forget that India, despite its relative, I would say, modest status in matters nuclear, right since the 50s and 60s, brought, I would say, a voice of both sanity and some prudence to the nuclear issue. So I was very encouraged to hear the White House readout that Siddiqui Maha had just shared with us.
Yep.
If in the final communique, I'm sure, as Ashok has pointed out, it's likely that the readout from the Chinese side may be different. Right. But in the event the leaders at the G20 in Bali can actually come up with a consensus statement and prevail upon Russia, I don't think Russia should be hectored. This is my personal view. Hopefully a malleable kind of message statement to Moscow that there is a consensus in the G20 that the nuclear issue should not be raised to the levels that it was in Feb and March by Moscow would be highly desirable.
Well, let's see what finally happens. I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. It's a very important meeting, not just at the bilateral level, but obviously at the G20 level. Remember, next year, September, is when this comes to India. It's going to be hosted in Delhi in September when India takes over the presidency of the G20. We'll take a short break, come back with more.